Hi, if you're trying to figure out what happened in this problem and where these answers came from, let's take a look at what the original problem is saying. So Daly decided he wanted to try to solve this inequality, turned it into an equation because he wanted to find out what the boundary is. The boundary means that is going to be the number that you're either going to be greater than and equal to or less than or equal to in your final answer. So what he did is he turned it into an equation, got that equals 50, but when you ended up getting this final answer, it flipped the inequality sign. So here's what happens with this. This is something we've been looking at and exploring, but may not have pointed it out to you exactly. So he said, okay, I'm going to set this up like an equation. Equals 100 minus 3x is greater than or equal to negative 50. If you're solving this just like you would normally do with an equation, you're going to subtract your 100 from each side because that's the number without the variable. You end up with negative 150 on that side and a negative 3x on this side. So you're going to end up dividing each side by that negative 3, and you've got x, and then you've got your negative 150 divided by negative 3 is going to give you 50. What you have to figure out now is what sign to put in this area, because you would normally think that you would take that sign and you would follow through with what was in the original problem. That makes total sense until you start plugging numbers into the original equation. So let's just say we stay with this greater than sign, and I said, okay, let's go with 51. 100, because 51 is greater than 50, 100 minus 3 times 51 is supposed to be greater than or equal to negative 50. When you do all your math on that, that is going to be 100 minus 153 should be greater than or equal to negative 50. And then you should end up with a negative 53 is greater than or equal to negative 50. That is not a true statement. Negative 53 is not bigger than negative 50. So that is why this cannot be the inequality sign in there. What's causing this to change is this negative 3 that is in front of the variable. So anytime you have a negative coefficient, which is the number that's right next to the variable, it causes your sign to flip in your final answer. So if we started with a greater than or equal to sign, we have to flip it to that less than or equal to. So again, you could turn it into an equation, just like Daly did, to get your boundary, and then you just have to figure out what the heck sign you want to put in there. And because that's a negative coefficient, you flip the sign. When you take a look at this problem, in order to figure out which values you need to circle or highlight to make this a true statement, you can take each of these values, substitute them in for x, and evaluate that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You can go ahead and do that. Little time consuming, but it also will give you an accurate answer. Another way of doing it is to take what we learned in that last problem and apply it to this one. So let's evaluate or create our boundary. So negative x plus 6 is going to be greater than or equal to 11. If you want to turn it into an equation, you can do so. However, I'm going to leave the inequality in here just to kind of get you guys moving along on this. So we're going to draw the line down. I'm going to do a negative 6 or subtract 6 from each side. You're left with a negative x, and you're left with a 5 on this side of the inequality. Remember that this negative sign in front of the x is actually a negative 1. So if we see that negative 1 in there, we're going to divide by a negative 1 on both sides, and that means that we are left with x and then a negative 5 here. So just like in that last problem, when we had a negative coefficient, so this negative 1 is a negative coefficient to the x, is going to cause you to take your greater than or equal to sign and turn it into a less than or equal to sign. So all of our answers have to fall into this category of being x is less than or equal to negative 5. Well, negative 3.9 is not less than negative 5, so that's why that's not an answer. 4 is obviously not less than negative 5. Anything that's positive is not going to be less than that. 0 isn't. So neither is 3.9. The only one that you might question right now is this -4, but -4 is actually greater than -5, which is why that is not one of our answers. And that's why negative 5.01 and -7 are answers to this inequality. Just keep in mind that negatives always kind of make your thinking flip or opposite your thinking. That's why we flip the inequality sign when we have a negative coefficient.